Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison and I talk about prison stuff. You might be wondering why I have a bucket next to me. Well, today we are talking about prison wine. It occurred to me recently that I have a prison YouTube channel and I've never done a video about prison wine. And there are a lot of misconceptions, myths, false information, and lies circulating around the internet regarding prison wine. So I thought I would make a video about it and show how it's actually done, coming from someone who spent over a decade on the inside. So the first thing that you should know about prison wine is that it's not what you see in the movies. I have seen some horrible prison wine, some hooch. That's what we call it in Kansas, hooch. I've seen some horrible stuff. You know, a lot of guys who haven't done time and have no idea how to make it, they come up with some stuff that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, man. If you hand me some hooch that has bread floating in it and has mold on the top, I'm not touching it. I only drank hooch a couple of times while I was in prison. I only made hooch a couple of times while I was in prison just because I didn't like the idea of getting in trouble and losing all my stuff for the sake of, getting a buzz for a couple hours. That said, I had friends that were old heads. I hung out with lifers and stuff like that. And they know how to make good hooch. And the first step of making good hooch is to stop thinking about it like, oh, this is prison wine, and start just thinking about it like it's wine. To make an alcoholic beverage, you need just a few things. Of course, in prison, you're going to need a container to put it in. And contrary to popular belief, we didn't use toilets to make our hooch. We would use trash bags. Now, I'm using a bucket, and I'm actually going to make quite a bit of this because I'm going to drink it because, it's good. The stuff that I make is good. It's drinkable. It's not the stuff that you see circulating around the internet. So I'm going to use a bucket, and this batch is going to be a lot bigger than what I would make in prison. But the ingredients are about the same. So the first thing you're going to need is a container. In prison, we use trash bags. Sometimes we would use a mop bucket, or we had these little 6-pack coolers that we would use. They work decent, but no toilets. To make alcohol, you need 3 things, basically. You need yeast, sugar, and water. And there are a lot of myths out there on what we actually use to get all that stuff on the inside, but I'm going to start out with sugar. In prison, you have access to different things. You have fruit. A lot of times on the chow line, they're going to serve you oranges and stuff like that. So you have your buddies collect their oranges instead of eating them. You have 4 or 5 friends collecting their oranges every day, whatever. That works. You also get maple syrup once a week on Pancake Day. I believe that's on a Sunday in Kansas. We would have pancakes with maple syrup. Sometimes you could buy maple syrup off a canteen, but an even better source of sugar, in my opinion, was honey. They sold honey on canteen in little 8-ounce or 16-ounce jars. So I have a big jug of honey here. It's 5 pounds of honey. So a lot of honey, and that's what we're going to be using primarily for our sugar today. The second thing that we're going to use for our sugar is apple juice, because every day at breakfast in Kansas, they serve you apple juice. Same thing as with the maple syrup. You just have your buddies save their apple juice and bring it back to their cell, or if you're in the hole, just have them pass their cup of apple juice over to you, and you collect that for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, till you have enough to do what you want, and then you have another source of sugar. There's a lot of other stuff on canteen that you can use. You can use jelly. That's really a popular thing in county. I had some hooch in county that had jelly in it. I wasn't a big fan. I've heard of people using ketchup, and I've seen people use ketchup, and I don't like it. To me, it makes a very acidic hooch, which if you use bread yeast, I'll get into that later, but if you use bread yeast, it's going to be a little bit acidic anyway, and the ketchup is just going to add more of it. So I don't like using ketchup as a source for sugar. But the apple juice, absolutely. So I have a bunch of little bottles of apple juice here, and that's what we're going to use in addition to our honey for sugar. The next ingredient that we need is yeast. And yeast occurs naturally. Yeast is in the air. You can find it on tree bark. You can find it on different plants. Dandelions are a good source of yeast. And so if somebody wanted to go out on the yard and pick dandelions, they could use that for yeast. The most common thing that I've seen from people who do it wrong in the joint, they'll use actual bread. And I don't think that's a very good source for yeast. It doesn't taste good. It doesn't look good. It's not something that I really enjoy. Sometimes they'll also use honey buns. I don't like that either. For me, the two most viable options when it comes to finding a source for yeast is either making a starter, or having a friend who works in the kitchen bring me back some bread yeast. The first one, making your own starter, involves getting a mixed vegetable cup or a veggie cup off a canteen. They sell, it's almost like a fruit cup, but it's vegetables. They sell that stuff on Canteen, and they sell corn in Kansas, or at least they used to. And so you'd open it up, you'd get a few cups of it, you open it up and let it sit out for a while, and the yeast in the air will begin to ferment the corn. And when that corn begins to ferment, it takes about a week or so. Then you can throw that in your hooch, and you have a yeast starter. The other thing is pretty simple. You just got to know somebody who works in the kitchen and have them snag some yeast for you, usually on the promise that when the hooch is done, you're going to share it with them. That's not very hard to accomplish. Today, I'm going to be using bread yeast. It works. We had it in prison, and so, yeah, that's what we're doing. I think I've listed my ingredients. I have honey. I have fruit juice. I have yeast. And there's not going to be any cruddy stuff floating in this hooch when it's all said and done. There's not going to be any mold on the top. It's going to be very drinkable. It's going to be sweet. It's going to have probably 7 to 12% alcohol when all is said and done. And yeah, it's going to be decent. If you don't mind the bready taste because of the bread yeast, you're golden, right? It works. So let me throw my ingredients in my big old bucket here, and we'll mix that up. And yeah, let's do that. In a minute, maybe off camera, I'm going to throw some hot water in this and rinse the rest of that honey out and pour that in there. But for now, that's good. All right, so now that all my ingredients are in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a stir. I'm going to put the lid on it, and I'm going to put it someplace warm. In prison, that's not really a big deal, especially in the summertime, because there's no AC in Kansas. I think there's one prison that has air conditioning in the state of Kansas. But this is how I make my hooch. All right, I don't like bread and nasty fruit floating in it. I don't make it in a toilet. And another myth that I would like to dispel is the idea that prison hooch is going to make you go blind. I don't think that's going to happen. I've never seen it happen. The only time I could really see someone going blind from some prison hooch would be if they used freeze distillation, or if they tried to make a reverse still or something like that and actually distill it somehow. Because if you get a lot of those methanols and all the nasty stuff in the heads and the tails from your booze in your liquor, and you actually drink that, that's going to have a bad effect on you. You know, that stuff is poisonous, so you can't do that. However, I've never seen that happen. So I got my mix here. I'm going to give it a stir, probably off camera. I'm going to put the lid on it. I'm going to put it someplace warm. And in 3 to 5 days, we should have something that's drinkable and should have enough punch to get the job done anyway. So stay tuned for part 2. I will do another video on this in a few days, and we'll see how it tastes. I already know because I've done it before, but yeah. Before I go, though, remember, this is a big batch. I wouldn't have made a batch this size in prison. I would have made maybe a gallon. This is almost 5 gallons. So, you know, the scale is bigger here, but that's because this is really good for what it is, and I'm going to drink it. So, you know. Anyway, thank you for watching. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I will see you all later.